Changed days, young man. Changed days. Loken's eyes narrowed as Cruz spoke.
What are you talking about?
I said it's changed days since...
No, said Loken. About Varvarus and the remembrances.
Haven't you heard? Oh, no, I suppose you haven't, said Cruz. Well, it seems Varvarus wasn't too pleased about you and the Mournival's return to the vengeful spirit with the War Master. The fool thinks heads should roll for the deaths you caused. He's been on the Vox daily to Malachhurst demanding we tell the fleet what happened, make reparations to the families of the dead, and then punish you all.
Punish us?
That's what he's saying, nodded Cruz. Claims he's already had Ingmei Singh dispatch communiques back to the Council of Terror about the mess you caused. Bloody nuisance, if you ask me. We didn't have to put up with this when we first set out. You fought and bled. And if people got in the way, then that was their tough luck. Loken was aghast at Cruz's words, once again feeling the shame of his actions on the embarkation deck. The innocent deaths he'd been part of would remain with him until his dying day. But what was done, and he wouldn't waste time on regret. For mere mortals to decree the death of an Astartes was unthinkable, however unfortunate the events had been. As troublesome a problem as Varvarus was, he was a problem for Malachhurst to deal with, but something in Cruz's words struck a familiar chord.
You said something about remembrances.
Yes, as if we didn't have enough to worry about.
Yet don't draw this out. Tell me what's going on.
Very well. Though I don't know what your hurry is, replied Cruz. It seems there's some anonymous remembrancer going about the ship, dishing out anti-Astartes propaganda, poetry or some such drivel. Crewmen have been finding pamphlets all over the ship, called The Truth Is All We Have, or something pretentious like that.
The truth is all we have, repeated Loken.
Yes, I think so. Loken spun on his heel and made his way from the strategium without another word. Not like it was back in my day, sighed Cruz, after Loken's departing back. It was late, and he was tired, but Ignace Carcassy was pleased with the last week's work. Each time he'd made a clandestine journey through the ship distributing his radical poetry, he'd returned hours later to find every copy gone. Though the ship's crew was no doubt confiscating some, he knew that others must have found their way into the hands of those who needed to hear what he had to say. The companionway was quiet, but then it always was these days. Most of those who held vigils for the fallen War Master did so either on Davin or in the larger spaces of the ship. An air of neglect hung over the vengeful spirit, as though even the servitors who cleaned and maintained it had paused in their duties to await the outcome of events on the planet below. As he walked back to his billet, Carcassy saw the symbol of the Lectitio Divinitatis scratched into bulkheads and passageways, time and time again, and he had the distinct impression that if he were to follow them, they would lead him to a group of the faithful. The faithful. It still sounded strange to think of such a term in these enlightened times. He remembered standing in the Fane on 6319 and wondering if belief in the divine was some immutable flaw in the character of mankind. Did man need to believe in something to fill some terrible emptiness within him? A wise man of old Earth had once claimed that science would destroy mankind, not through its weapons of mass destruction, but through finally proving that there was no God. Such knowledge, he claimed, would sear the mind of man and leave him gibbering and insane, with the realization that he was utterly alone in an uncaring universe. Carcassy smiled and wondered what that old man would have said if he could see the truth of the Imperium, taking its secular light to the far corners of the galaxy. On the other hand, perhaps this Lectitio Divinitatis cult was vindication of his words. Proof that, in the face of that emptiness, man had chosen to invent new gods to replace the ones that had passed out of memory. Carcassy wasn't aware of the Emperor having transubstantiated from man to God, but the cult's literature, which was appearing with the same regularity as his own publications, claimed that he had already risen beyond mortal concerns. He shook his head at such foolishness, already working out how to incorporate this weighty pontificating into his new poems. His billet was just ahead, and as he reached towards the recessed handle, he immediately knew that something was wrong. The door was slightly ajar, and the reek of ammonia filled the corridor, but even over that powerful smell, Carcassy detected a familiar, pervasive aroma that could mean only one thing. The impertinent ditty he had composed for Euphrates Keeler concerning the stink of the Astartes leapt to mind, and he knew who would be behind the door, even before he opened it. He briefly considered simply walking away, but realized that there would be no point. He took a deep breath and pushed open the door. Inside, his cabin was a mess, though it was a mess of his own making rather than that of any intruder. Standing with his back to him and seeming to fill the small space with his bulk was, as he'd expected, Captain Loken.
"Hello, Ignace,"
said Loken, putting down one of the bondsman number 7s. Carcassy had filled 2 of them with random jottings and thoughts, and he knew that Loken wouldn't be best pleased with what he must have read. You didn't need to be a student of literature to understand the vitriol written there. "Captain Loken," replied Carcassy. "I'd asked to what do I owe the pleasure of this visit, but we both know why you're here, don't we?" Loken nodded, and Carcassy, feeling his heart pounding in his chest, saw that the Astartes was holding his anger in check by the finest of threads. This was not the raging fury of Abaddon, but a cold steel rage that could destroy him without a moment's pause or regret. Suddenly Carcassy realized how dangerous his newly rediscovered muse was, and how foolish he'd been in thinking he would remain undiscovered for long. Strangely, now that he was unmasked, he felt his defiance smother the fire of his fear, and knew that he had done the right thing.
"Why?"
hissed Loken.
"I vouched for you, Remembrancer. I put my good name on the line for you, and this is how I am repaid."
"Yes, Captain," said Carcassy. "You did vouch for me. You made me swear to tell the truth, and that is what I have been doing."
"The truth!"
roared Loken, and Carcassy quailed before his anger, remembering how easily the captain's fist had bludgeoned people to death.
"This is not the truth. This is libelous trash. Your lies are already spreading to the rest of the fleet. I should kill you for this, Ignace."
"Kill me? Just like you killed all those innocent people on the embarkation deck?" shouted Carcassy. "Is that what Astartes justice means now? Someone gets in your way or says something you don't agree with and you kill them? If that's what our glorious Imperium has come to, then I want nothing to do with it." He saw the anger drain from Loken and felt a momentary pang of sorrow for him, but quashed it as he remembered the blood and screams of the dying. He lifted a collection of poems and held them out to Loken. "Anyway, this is what you wanted."
"You think I wanted this?"
said Loken, hurling the pamphlets across the billet and looming over him.
"Are you insane?"
"Not at all, my dear Captain," said Carcassy, affecting a calm he didn't feel. "I have you to thank for this."
"Me? What are you talking about?"
asked Loken, obviously confused. Carcassy could see the chink of doubt in Loken's bluster. He offered a bottle of wine to Loken, but the giant warrior shook his head. "You told me to keep telling the truth, ugly and unpalatable as it might be," said Carcassy, pouring some wine into a cracked and dirty tin mug. "The truth is all we have. Remember?"
"I remember,"
sighed Loken, sitting down on Carcassy's creaking cot bed. Carcassy let out a breath as he realized the immediate danger had passed, and took a long, gulping drink of the wine. It was a poor vintage and had been open for too long, but it helped to calm his jangling nerves. He pulled a high-backed chair from his writing desk and sat before Loken, who held his hand out for the bottle.
"You're right, Ignace. I did tell you to do this, but I never imagined it would lead us to this place,"
said Loken, taking a swig from the bottle. "Nor I, but it has," replied Carcassy. "The question now becomes, what are you going to do about it?"
"I don't really know, Ignace," admitted Loken. "I think you're being unfair to the Mournival, given the circumstances we found ourselves in. All we—"
"No," interrupted Carcassy. "I'm not. You Astartes stand above us mortals in all regards, and you demand our respect, but that respect has to be earned. It requires your ethics to be without question. You not only have to stay above the line between right and wrong, you also have to stay well clear of the grey areas in between." Loken laughed humorously.
"I thought it was Cinderman's job to be a teacher of ethics."
"Well, our dear Kirill has not been around much lately, has he?" said Carcassy. "I admit I'm somewhat of a latecomer to the ranks of the righteous, but I know that what I'm doing is right. More than that, I know it's necessary."
You feel that strongly about this?
I do, Captain. More strongly than I have felt about anything in my life.
And you'll keep publishing this?
Asked Logan, lifting a pile of scribbled notes. Is there a right answer to that question, Captain? Asked Carcassy.
Yes. So answer honestly.
If I can, said Carcassy, then I will.
You'll bring trouble down on us both, Ignace Carcassy, said Logan. But if we have no truth, then we are nothing. And if I stop you speaking out, then I am no better than a tyrant.
So, you're not going to stop me writing? Or send me back to Terra?
I should, but I won't. You should be aware that your poems have made you powerful enemies, Ignace. Enemies who will demand your dismissal, or worse. As of this moment, however, you are under my protection, said Logan.
You think I'll need protection? Asked Carcassy.
Definitely,
said Logan. I'm told you wanted to see me, said Euphrates Keeler. Care to tell me why? Ah, my dear Euphrates, said Kirill Cinderman, looking up from his food. Do come in. She'd found him in the subdeck dining area, after scouring the dusty passages of Archive Chamber 3 for him for over an hour. According to the iterators left on the ship, the old man had been spending almost all of his time there, missing his lectures, not that there were any students to lecture just now, and ignoring the request of his peers to join them for meals or drinks. Torgadon had left her to find Cinderman on her own, his duty discharged simply by bringing her back to the Vengeful Spirit. Then he had gone in search of Captain Logan, to travel back down to Darwin with him. Keeler didn't doubt that he'd pass on what he'd seen on the planet to Logan, but she no longer cared who knew of her beliefs. Cinderman looked terrible, his eyes haggard and grey, his features sallow and gaunt. You don't look good, Cinderman, she said. I could say the same for you, Euphrates, said Cinderman. You've lost weight. It doesn't suit you. Most women would be grateful for that. But you didn't have one of the Astartes fetch me back here to comment on my eating habits, did you? Cinderman laughed, pushing aside the book he'd been poring over, and said, No, you're right. I didn't. Then why did you? She asked, sitting opposite him. If it's because of something Ignace has told you, then save your breath. Ignace? No, I haven't spoken to him for some time, replied Cinderman. It was Mercedy Ollerton who came to see me. She tells me you've become quite the agitator for this Lectitio Divinitatis cult. It's not a cult. No? Then what would you call it? She thought about it for a moment and then answered, A new faith. A shrewd answer, said Cinderman. If you'll indulge me, I'd like to know more about it. You would? I thought you'd brought me back to try and teach me the error of my ways. To use your iterators' wiles to try and talk me out of my beliefs. Not at all, my dear, said Cinderman. You may think your tribute is paid in secret in the recesses of your heart, but it will out. We are a curious species when it comes to worship. The things that dominate our imagination determine our lives and our character. Therefore, it behooves us to be careful what we worship. For what we are worshipping, we are becoming. And what do you think we worship? Cinderman looked furtively around the subdeck and produced a sheet of paper that she recognized immediately as one of the Lectitio Divinitatis pamphlets. That's what I want you to help me with. I have read this several times, and I must admit that I am intrigued by the things it posits. You see, ever since the events beneath the Whisperheads, I haven't been sleeping too well, and I thought to bury myself in my books. I thought that if I could understand what happened to us, then I could rationalize it. And did you? He smiled, but she could see the weariness and despair behind the gesture. Honestly? No, not really. The more I read, the more I saw how far we'd come since the days of religious hectoring from an autocratic priesthood. By the same token, the more I read, the more I realized there was a pattern emerging. A pattern? What kind of pattern? Look, said Cinderman, coming round the table to sit next to her, and flattening out the pamphlet before her. Your Lectitio Divinitatis talks about how the Emperor has moved amongst us for thousands of years. Yes? Yes. Well, in the old texts, rubbish mostly, ancient histories and lurid tales of barbarism and bloodshed, I found some recurring themes. A being of golden light appears in several of the texts, and, much as I hate to admit it, it sounds a lot like what this paper describes. I don't know what truth may lie in this avenue of investigation, but I would know more of it, Euphrates. She didn't know what to say. Look, he said, pulling the book around and turning it towards her. This book is written in a derivation of an ancient human language, but one I haven't seen before. I can make out certain passages, I think, but it's a very complex structure, and without some of the root words to make the right grammatical connections, it's proving very difficult to translate. What book is it? I believe it to be the Book of Lorgar, although I haven't been able to speak with First Chaplain Erebus to verify that fact. If it is, it may be a copy given to the War Master by Lorgar himself. So, why does that make it so important? Don't you remember the rumors about Lorgar? Asked Sindaman urgently. That he too worshipped the Emperor as a god. It's said that his legion devastated world after world for not showing the proper devotion to the Emperor, and then raised up great monuments to him. I remember the tales, yes. But that's all they are, surely. Probably. But what if they aren't? Said Sindaman, his eyes alight with the possibility of uncovering such knowledge. What if a Primarch, one of the Emperor's sons no less, was privy to something we as mere mortals are not yet ready for? If my work so far is correct, then this book talks about bringing forth the essence of God. I must know what that means. Despite herself, Euphrates felt her pulse race with this potential knowledge. Undeniable proof of the Emperor's divinity coming from Kirill Sindaman would raise the Lectitio Divinitatis far above its humble status and into the realm of a phenomenon that could spread from one side of the galaxy to the other. Sindaman saw that realization in her face and said, Miss Keeler, I have spent my entire adult life promulgating the truth of the Imperium, and I am proud of the work I have done. But what if we are teaching the wrong message? If you are right, and the Emperor is a god, then what we saw beneath the mountains of 6319 represents a danger more horrifying than we can possibly imagine. If it truly was a spirit of evil, then we need a divine being such as the Emperor more than ever. I know that words cannot move mountains, but they can move the multitude. We've proven that time and time again. People are more ready to fight and die for a word than for anything else. Words shape thought, stir feeling, and force action. They kill and revive, corrupt and cure. If being an iterator has taught me anything, it's that men of words, priests, prophets, and intellectuals have played a more decisive role in history than any military leaders or statesmen. If we can prove the existence of God, then I promise you, the iterators will shout that truth from the highest towers of the land. Euphrates stared, open-mouthed, as Kirill Sindaman turned her world upside down. This arch-prophet of secular truth speaking of gods and faith. Looking into his eyes, she saw the racking self-doubt and crisis of identity that he had undergone since she had last seen him. Understanding how much of him had been lost these last few days, and how much had been gained. Let me see, she said, and Sindaman pushed the book in front of her. The writing was an angular cuneiform, running up and down the page, rather than along it, and right away she could see that she would be no help in its translation, although elements of the script looked somehow familiar. I can't read it, she said. What does it say? Well, that's the problem. I can't tell exactly, said Sindaman. I can make out the odd word, but it's difficult without the grammatical key. I've seen this before, she said, suddenly remembering why the writing looked familiar. I hardly think so, Euphrates, said Sindaman. This book has been in the archive chamber for decades. I don't think anyone's read it since it was put there. Don't patronize me, Sindaman. I've definitely seen this before, she insisted. Where? Keeler reached into her pocket and gripped the memory coil of her smashed picture. She rose from her seat and said, Gather your notes, and I'll meet you in the archive chamber in 30 minutes. Where are you going? asked Cinderden, gathering up the book. "To get something you're going to want to see." Horus opened his eyes to see a sky thick with polluted clouds, the taste in the air chemical and stagnant. It smelled familiar. It smelled of home. He lay on an uneven plateau of dusty black powder in front of a long exhausted mining tunnel and felt the hollow ache of homesickness as he realized this was Chthoniya. The smog of the distant foundries and the relentless hammering of deep-core mining filled the sky with particulate matter, and he felt an ache of loneliness for the simpler times he had spent here. Horus looked around for Sejanus, but whatever the swirling vortex beneath Terra had been, it had evidently not swept up his old comrade in its fury. His journey here had not been as silent and instant as his previous journeys through this strange and unknown realm. The powers that dwelled in the warp had shown him a glimpse of the future, and it was a desolate place indeed. Foul xeno breeds held sway over huge swathes of the galaxy, and a pall of hopelessness gripped the sons of man. The power of humanity's glorious armies was broken, the legions shattered and reduced to fragments of what they had once been. Bureaucrats, scriveners, and officialdom ruling in a hellish regime where men lived in glorious lives of no consequence or ambition. In this dark future, mankind had not the strength to challenge the overlords, to fight against the terrors the Emperor had left them to. His father had become a carrion god, who neither felt his subjects' pain nor cared for their fate. In truth, the solitude of Chthoniya was welcome, his thoughts tumbling through his head in a mad whirl of anger and resentment. The Emperor tinkered with powers far beyond his means to master, and had already failed to control once before. He had bargained away his sons for the promise of power, and now returned to Terra to try once again. "I will not let this happen," Horus said quietly. As he spoke, he heard the plaintive howl of a wolf and pushed himself to his feet. Nothing like a wolf lived on Chthoniya, and Horus was sick of this constant pursuit through the warp. "Show yourselves!" he shouted, punching the air and bellowing an ululating war cry. His cry was answered as the howling came again, drawing nearer, and Horus felt his battle lust swim to the surface. He had the taste of blood after the slaughter of the custodian guards and welcomed the chance to spill yet more. Shadows moved around him, and he shouted, "Lupercal! Lupercal!" Shapes resolved from the shadows, and he saw a red-furred wolf pack detached from the darkness. They surrounded him, and Horus recognized the pack leader as the beast that had spoken to him when he had first awoken in the warp. "What are you?" asked Horus. "And no lies." "A friend," said the wolf, its form blurring and running with rippling lines of golden light. The wolf reared up on its hind legs, its form elongating and widening as it became more humanoid, its proportions swelling and changing until it stood as tall as Horus himself. Copper skin replaced fur, and its eyes ran like liquid as they formed one golden orb. Thick red hair sprouted from the figure's head, and bronze-colored armor shimmered into existence upon his breast and arms. He wore a billowing cloak of feathers, and Horus knew him as well as he knew his own reflection. "Magnus," said Horus, "is it really you?"
"Yes, my brother, it is,"
said Magnus, and the two warriors embraced in a clatter of plate. "How?" asked Horus. "Are you dying too?"
"No,"
said Magnus. "I am not."
"You must listen to me, my brother. It has taken me too long to reach you, and I do not have much time here. The spells and wards placed around you are powerful, and every second I am here, a dozen of my thralls die to keep them open."
"Don't listen to him, Warmaster," said another voice, and Horus turned to see Hasta Sejanus emerge from the darkness of the mining tunnel. "This is who we have been trying to avoid. It is a shape-changing creature of the warp that feasts on human souls. It seeks to devour yours so that you cannot return to your body. All that was Horus would be no more."
"He lies,"
spat Magnus.
"You know me, Horus. I am your brother, but who is he? Hasta? Hasta is dead. I know, but here, in this place, death is not the end. There is truth in that, agreed Magnus. But you would place your trust in the dead over your own brother. We mourn Hasta, but he is gone from us. This impostor does not even wear his own true face.
Magnus thrust his fist forward and closed his fingers on the air, as though gripping something invisible. Then he wrenched his hand back. Hasta screamed, and a silver light blazed like a magnesium flare from his eyes. Horus squinted through the blinding light, still seeing an Astartes warrior, but one now armored in the livery of the Word-bearers.
Erebus? asked Horus.
Yes, War Master, agreed First Chaplain Erebus. The long red scar across his throat had already begun to heal. I came to you in the guise of Sejanus to ease your understanding of what must be done, but I have spoken nothing but the truth since we traveled this realm.
Do not listen to him, Horus,
warned Magnus.
The future of the galaxy is in your hands.
Indeed it is, said Erebus, for the Emperor will abandon the galaxy in his quest for apotheosis. Horus must save the Imperium, for it is evident that the Emperor will not. 17. Horror. Angels and Demons. Blood Pact. With the compact edit engine tucked under one arm and a sense of limitless possibilities filling her heart, Euphrates Keeler made her way through the stacks of Archive Chamber 3 towards Cinderman's table. The white-haired iterator sat hunched over the book he had shown her earlier, his breath misting in the chill air. She sat down beside him and placed the edit engine on the desk, slotting a memory coil into the imager slot. "It's cold in here, Cinderman," she said. "How you haven't caught a fever, I'll never know." He nodded. "Yes, it is rather cold, isn't it? It's been like this for days now. Ever since the War Master was taken to Davin, in fact." The screen of the edit engine flickered to life, its white screen bathing them both in its washed-out light as Keeler flicked through the images she had captured. She zipped through those she had taken while on Davin's surface and those of Captain Loken and the Mournival prior to their departure for the Whisperheads. "What are you looking for exactly?" asked Cinderman. "This," she said triumphantly, angling the screen so he could see the image it displayed. The file contained 8 pictures, all taken at the War Council held on Davin, where Yugen Temba's treachery had been revealed. Each shot included First Chaplain Erebus, and she used the engine's trackball to zoom in on his tattooed skull. Cinderman gasped as he recognized the symbols on Erebus's head. They were identical to the ones in the book that he had shown Keeler on the subdeck. "That's it, then," he breathed. "It must be the Book of Lorgar. Can you get any closer to get the symbols from all sides of Erebus's head? Is that possible?" "Please, it's me," she replied, her hands dancing across the keys of the edit engine. Using all the various images and shots of the word-bearer from different angles, Euphrates was able to create a composite image of the symbols tattooed onto his skull and projected onto a flat pane. Cinderman watched her skill with admiration, and it took her less than 10 minutes to resolve a high-gain image of the symbols on Erebus's head. With a grunt of satisfaction, she made a final keystroke, and a glossy hard copy of the screen's image slid from the side of the machine with a whirring sigh. Keeler lifted it by the corners and waved it for a second or two to dry it, before handing it to Cinderman. "There," she said. "Does that help you translate what this book says?" Cinderman slid the image across the table and held it close to the book, his head bobbing back and forth between the book and his notes as his finger traced down the trails of cuneiforms. Yes, he said excitedly. "Here, you see, this word is laden with vowel transliterations, and this one is clearly a personal argot, though of a much denser polysyllabic construction." Keeler tuned out of what Cinderman was saying after a while, unable to make sense of the jargon he was using. Carcassy or Ollerton might be able to understand the iterator, but images were her thing, not words. "How long will it take you to get any sense out of it?" she asked. "What? Oh, not long, I shouldn't wonder," he said. "Once you know the grammatical logic of a language, it is a relatively simple matter to unlock the rest of its meaning." "So, how long?" "Give me an hour, and we'll read this together, yes?" She nodded and pushed her chair back, saying, "Fine. I'll take a look around if that's all right. Yes, feel free to have a look at whatever catches your eye, my dear, though I fear much of this collection is more suited to dusty academics like myself. Keeler smiled as she got up from the table. I may not be a documentarist, but I know which end of a book to read, Kirill. Of course you do. I didn't mean to suggest... Too easy, she said, and wandered off into the stacks to browse while Cinderman returned to his books. Despite her quip, she soon realized that Cinderman was exactly right. She spent the next hour wandering up and down shelves packed with scrolls, books, and musty loose-leaf manuscripts. Most of the books had unfathomable titles like Reading Astrologies and Astrotelepathic Auguries, Malefic Abjurations and the multifarious horrors associated with such works, or the Book of Atum. As she passed this last book, she felt a shiver travel the length of her spine and reached up to slide the book from the shelf. The smell of its worn leather binding was strong, and though she had no real wish to read the book, she couldn't deny the strange attraction it held for her. The book creaked open in her grip, and the dust of centuries wafted from its pages as she opened them. She coughed, hearing Cinderman reading aloud from the Book of Lorgar as he translated more of the text. Surprisingly, the words before her were written in a language she could understand, and her eyes quickly scanned the page. Cinderman's words came again, and it took Euphrates a moment to register that the words she was hearing echoed the words she was seeing on the page, the letters blurring and rearranging themselves before her very eyes. The faded script seemed to illuminate from within, and as she read what they said, the book's pages burst into flames. She dropped the book with a cry of alarm. She turned and ran back towards where she had left Cinderman, turning the corner to see him reading aloud from the book with a terrified expression on his face. He gripped the edges of the book as though unable to let go, the words pouring from him in a flood of voices. A crackling, electric sensation set Euphrates' teeth on edge, and she cried out in terror as she saw a swirling cloud of bluish light hovering above the desk. The image twisted and jerked in the air, moving as though out of sync with the world around it. "Kirill, what's happening?" she screamed, as the terror of the Whisperheads returned to her with paralyzing force, and she dropped to her knees. Cinderman didn't answer, the words streaming from his unwilling mouth and his eyes fixed in terror on the unnatural sight above him. She could tell the same fear that she felt was also running hot in his veins. The light bulged and stretched as though something was pushing through from beyond, and an iridescent questing limb oozed from its depths. Keeler felt the anger that had consumed her in the months following her attack break through the fear, and she surged to her feet. Keeler ran towards Cinderman and gripped his skinny wrists, as the suggestion of a rippling body of undulating glowing flesh began tearing through the light. His hands were locked on the book, the knuckles white, and she couldn't prise them loose as he continued to give voice to the terrible words within its pages. "Kirill, let go of the damn book!" she cried, as an awful ripping sound came from above. She risked a look upwards, and saw yet more tentacled limbs pushing through the light in an obscene parody of birth. "I'm sorry, Kirill!" she shouted, and punched the iterator across the jaw. He pitched backwards out of his chair, and the torrent of words was cut off as the book fell from his hands. She quickly circled the table and lifted Cinderman to his feet. As she did so, she heard a grotesque sucking sound and a hard, wet thud of something heavy landing on the table. Euphrates didn't waste time looking back, but took off as fast as she could towards the stacks, supporting the lurching Cinderman as she went. The pair of them staggered away from the table as a glittering light behind them threw their shadows out before them, and a cackling shriek like laughter washed over them. Keeler heard a whoosh of air, and something bright and hot flashed past her, exploding against the shelves with a hot bang like a firework. The wood hissed and spat where it had been struck, and she looked over her shoulder to see a horror of flailing limbs and glowing, twisting flesh leap after them. It moved with a rippling motion, lunatic faces, eyes and cackling mouths forming and reforming from the liquid matter of its body. Blue and red light flared from within it, strobing in dazzling beams through the archive. Another bolt of phosphorescent brightness streaked towards them, and Keeler threw herself and Cinderman flat as it blasted the shelf beside them, sending flaming books and splintered chunks of wood flying. The horrifying monster loped through the stacks on long, elastic limbs, its speed and agility incredible, and Keeler could see that it was circling around to get behind them. She dragged Cinnamon to his feet as she heard the monster's maddening laughter cackling behind her. The iterator seemed to have regained some measure of his senses after her punch, and once again they ran between the twisting, narrow rows of shelves towards the chamber's exit. Behind her, she could hear the whoosh of flames as the horror squeezed its body into the row and books erupted into geysers of pink fire. The end of the row was just ahead of her, and she almost laughed as she heard the klaxons that warned of a fire screech in alarm. Surely, someone would come to help them now. They burst from the end of the row, and Cinnamon stumbled, again carrying her to the floor with him. They fell in a tangle of limbs, scrambling desperately to put some distance between them and the loathsome monster. Keela rolled onto her back as it pushed itself from the row of shelves, its rippling bulk undulating with roiling internal motion. Leering eyes and wide, fang-filled mouths erupted across its amorphous body, and she screamed as it vomited a breath of searing blue fire towards her. Though she knew it would do no good, she closed her eyes and threw her arms up to ward off the flames, but a sudden silence enveloped her, and the expected burning agony never hit.
"Harry,"
said a trembling voice.
"I cannot hold it much longer."
Keela turned and saw the white-robed form of the vengeful spirit's mistress of astropaths, Ingmei Singh, standing in the archive chamber's doorway with her hands outstretched before her.
"Horus, my brother,"
said Magnus.
"you must not believe whatever he has told you. It is lies, all of it. Lies that disguise his sinister purpose."
"Those with courage and character to speak the truth always seem sinister to the ignorant," snarled Erebus. "You dare speak of lies while you stand before us in the warp? How can this be without the use of sorcery? Sorcery you were expressly forbidden to practice by the Emperor himself."
"Do not presume to judge me, whelp!"
shouted Magnus, hurling a glittering ball of fire towards the first chaplain. Horus watched as the flames streaked towards Erebus and enveloped him, but as the fire died, he saw that Erebus was unharmed, his armor not so much as scratched, and his skin unblemished. Erebus laughed. "You are too far away, Magnus. Your powers cannot reach me here." Horus watched as Magnus hurled bolt after bolt of lightning from his fingertips, amazed and horrified to see his brother employing such powers. Though all the legions had once had librarius divisions that trained warriors to tap into the power of the warp, they had been disbanded after the Emperor's decree at the Council of Nicaea. Clearly, Magnus had paid that order no mind, and such conceit staggered Horus. Eventually, his Cyclopean brother recognized that his powers were having no effect on Erebus, and he dropped his hands to his side. "You see," said Erebus, turning to Horus, "he cannot be trusted."
"Nor can you, Erebus," said Horus. "You came to me cloaked in the identity of another. You claim my brother Magnus is naught but some warped beast set upon devouring me, and then you speak to him as though he is exactly as he seems. If he is here by sorcery, then how else can you be here?"
Erebus paused, caught in his lie, and said,
"You are right, my lord.
"The sorcery of the Serpent Lodge has sent me to you to help you, and to offer you this chance of life. The Serpent Priestess had to cut my throat to do it, and once I return to the world of flesh, I will kill the bitch for that. But know that everything I have shown you is real. You saw it yourself, and you know the truth." Magnus towered over the figure of Erebus. His crimson mane shook with fury, but Horus saw that he kept tight rein on his anger as he spoke.
"The future is not set, Horus. Erebus may have shown you a future, but that is only one possible future. It is not absolute. Have faith in that."
"Pah!" sneered Erebus. "Faith is just another way of not wanting to know what is true."
"You think I don't know that, Magnus," snapped Horus.
"I know of the warp and the tricks it can play with the mind. I am not stupid. I knew that this was not Sejanus, just as I know that without a context, everything I have seen here is meaningless." Horus saw the crestfallen look on Erebus's face and laughed. "You must take me for a fool, Erebus, if you thought that such simple parlor tricks would bewitch me to your cause."
"My brother,"
smiled Magnus.
"You are a wonder to me."
"Be quiet," snarled Horus. "You are no better than Erebus. You will not manipulate me like this, for I am Horus. I am the War Master." Horus relished their confusion, One was his brother, the other a warrior he had counted as a valued counselor and devoted follower. He had sorely misjudged them both.
"I can trust neither of you," he said. "I am Horus, and I make my own fate."
Erebus stepped towards him, with his hands outstretched in supplication. "You should know that I came to you at the behest of my lord and master, Lorgar. He already has knowledge of the Emperor's quest to ascend to godhood, and has sworn himself to the powers of the warp. When the Emperor rejected Lorgar's worship, he found other gods all too willing to accept his devotion. My Primarch's power has grown tenfold, and it is but a fraction of the power that could be yours were you to pledge yourself to their cause."
"He lies!" cried Magnus. "Lorgar is loyal. He would never turn against the Emperor."
Horus listened to Erebus's words and knew with utter certainty that he spoke the truth. Lorgar, his most beloved brother, had already embraced the power of the warp. Warring emotions vied for supremacy within him: disappointment, anger, and, if he was honest, a spark of jealousy that Lorgar should have been chosen first. If wise Lorgar would choose such powers as patrons, was there not some merit in that?
"Horus," said Magnus, "I am running out of time. Please, be strong, my brother. Think of what this mongrel dog is asking you to do. He would have you spit on your oaths of loyalty. He is forcing you to betray the Emperor and turn on your brother Astartes. You must trust the Emperor to do what is right."
"The Emperor plays dice with the fate of the galaxy," countered Erebus, "and he throws them where they cannot be seen."
"Horus, please!"
cried Magnus, his voice taking on a ghostly quality as his image began to fade.
"You must not do this, or all we have fought for will be cast to ruin forever. You cannot do this terrible thing."
"Is it so terrible?" asked Erebus. "It is but a small thing, really. Deliver the Emperor to the gods of the warp, and unlimited power can be yours. I told you before that they have no interest in the realms of men, and that promise still holds true. The galaxy will be yours to rule over, as the new master of mankind."
"Enough!"
roared Horus, and the world was silence.
"I have made my choice."
Keeler helped Kirill Sindamin to his feet, and together they fled through the archive chamber's door. Ingmei Singh's trembling arms were still outstretched, and Keeler could feel waves of psychic cold radiating from her with the effort of holding the horror within the chamber at bay.
"Close the door,"
said Ingmei Singh through gritted teeth. Veins stood out on her neck and forehead, and her porcelain features were lined with pain. Keeler didn't need to be told twice, and she dropped Sindamin to get the door, as Ingmei Singh backed away with slow, shuffling steps.
"No!"
shouted the astropath, dropping her arms. Keeler hauled on the door as the roaring, seething laughter of the beast swelled once again. Alarm klaxons and its shrieks of insanity filled her ears as the door swung shut. Something heavy impacted on the other side, and she could feel its raw heat through the metal. Ingmei Singh helped her, but the astropath was too frail to be of much use, and Keeler knew they couldn't hold the door for long.